Chapter 39 closes the section on restoration, and chapter 40, to the end of the book, is about the temple. But these two sections are deeply connected by what happens in chapters 38 to 39. Looking back a few verses into chapter 37, we read in verses 24 to 28 amazing promises of restoration, which include giving David as a shepherd for the people, bringing them back to the land, and making a covenant of peace with them. The last three verses, 26 to 28, each state that the Lord will dwell among them. Twice it is said that the Lord's sanctuary will be among them forevermore. Earlier in Ezekiel, in chapters 8 to 11, the prophet had been taken to Jerusalem to witness scenes of wickedness and idolatry. And as these scenes unfolded, he saw the glory of the Lord depart in stages from the temple and leave it altogether. When Ezekiel is taken back to Jerusalem in a vision in chapter 40 onwards, it is to be given a tour of the new sanctuary, and then to witness the return and re-enthronement of Yahweh. This is the end of a very long and painful process of dealing with his impossible people and all the powerful nations amongst which they live. There has been punishment and destruction, but there has also been pruning and refining. Then there will be forgiving and restoring, and lastly, sanctification by the presence of God and the pouring out of his Spirit. The role of the nations in the life of Israel has been quite negative. They have tempted Israel, betrayed them, overwhelmed, abused, and destroyed them. The Lord has used, above all, Babylon and his servant Nebuchadnezzar to judge Israel and other nations as well. But the nations have served their purpose, and now their time has come. There is a deeper problem, however. Israel profaned the name of their Lord by their wickedness. The Lord was himself forced into an ambiguous situation with his public honour by punishing them. On the one hand, he is seen as one who is holy and just and will not ignore wickedness forever and betrayal. On the other hand, these were his people, and because they have been destroyed and removed from the land and his temple razed to the ground, it brings shame on the name of God. To make matters worse, Marduk, the god of Babylon, is seen as the one who is superior to Yahweh, who destroys his temple and carries off all its gold and priests. All this is to say that before we can get to the place where Yahweh restores everything and is enthroned again amongst his people, a reckoning is due. This is not merely vengeance against the nations, it is the reclaiming of Yahweh's honour. It is acting for the sake of his name. The battle which Ezekiel sees in chapters 38 to 39 is the final settling of accounts, where once everyone has served Yahweh's purpose, they are now led by him into one gigantic confrontation, where they are together consumed. It is only after this re-establishment of Yahweh's honour, which also serves to destroy Israel's enemies and thus provide the peace of the covenant, which makes possible and appropriate the return of the king to his throne, the temple on Mount Zion. Turning now to the chapters themselves, the most pressing question is, of course, who is Gog of Magog? Magog is mentioned in the Table of Nations in Genesis 10, but Gog appears nowhere in or out of the Bible. There are, of course, different proposals for who Gog is, but I will just give you the one that I think might be right. Gog is a mythical figure, an image of resurgent horror. That is, some memory of a terrible threat which still lingers, even though the source of it has long perished. Gog is called, in 38, 2-3, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. These are two names which also come from Genesis 10, and they were later on nations in Cappadocia, These were a constant threat to Assyria until they were destroyed by the Cimmerians. In chapter 32, when Ezekiel is telling Egypt it will go down to the pit, the underworld, several formerly powerful and terrifying nations would be there to meet them. These include Assyria, Elam, and Meshech and Tubal. Although they are no more, the length of the threat they posed may have lived on in Eastern memory. The idea that they might somehow come back would be chilling. As for Gog himself, he might represent a powerful king of Lydia, now in Turkey, called Giges in Greek and Gugu in Assyrian. By the time of this prophecy, he has been dead for more than 100 years. He would be a good candidate for a mythical figure of evil who comes from the past for a final battle in the future. Also lending a mystical air of the remote past is the name of Gomer in 38:6, who also comes from Genesis 10. The armies are not only comprised of the ancient past, as Persia, Ethiopia, and Put are there too, who are contemporaries with Ezekiel and his community. It is a bringing together of a rage from the past and the present against the people of God, which he will all at once obliterate. We will meet Gog again in Revelation 20, who, with Magog, represent the nations gathered by Satan to destroy the saints and Jerusalem. God consumes them with fire, and the devil is thrown into the eternal fire. We are also going to see the notion of a resurgent horror from the past, used in particular with the beast from the sea. Although this video is now too long again, I want to just offer a couple of thoughts about the temple in chapter 40 and onwards to 42. First, in verse 2, Ezekiel is brought to a very high mountain. This is theological geography, using mythical language for theological purpose. Height connotes greatness. Isaiah 2 and Micah 4 prophesied it would be established as the highest of mountains and that the nations would stream to it. In reality, Mount Zion was lower than the surrounding mountains. But the Bible, in poetry, whether prophetic or psalmic, will sometimes use non-literal descriptions. In Psalm 48, the holy mountain is beautiful in elevation, again a reference to its great height, and it is described as being in the far north, although actually it is in the south. The far north, again, was a mythical place, remote and celestial, as we saw in Ezekiel 1, when the storm comes from that direction. The plan for the temple is not given so it can be constructed from it. Not all the information is provided. All that is really given is a floor plan, and it is similar to the one Solomon built, though there are enough differences to distinguish it, not just from Solomon's, but from the wilderness tabernacle and the second temple as well. This led to the expectation of some Jews that it is the plan for a future third temple. One difference worth noting is that, unlike the Solomonic temple, this one has 2 courtyards, thus providing an extra buffer for the holy areas, keeping out what is common and profane. Ezekiel watches the man whose appearance shines like bronze measure the temple. Unlike the disorder and defilement Ezekiel witnessed in chapters 8 to 11, here everything is perfect. Everything is in order and fit for purpose, ready for the return of the glory of the Lord.